So, when we talk about the rivalry between the United States and China in 2025, we're not talking about just one single story. This is a massive global competition, and it's playing out on a bunch of different fronts all at the same time. To really get a handle on what's at stake, you gotta break this thing down. So let's do that. Let's dig in.
It's the question on everyone's mind, right? And yeah, you can definitely see some parallels, this global competition for influence. But today's rivalry it's fundamentally different. Unlike the last century, the American and Chinese economies are so deeply tangled up with each other. And that economic reality, that interdependence, it just creates a whole new level of complexity that makes this a totally unique challenge for the entire world.
So, to make sense of it all, we're going to look at this through a five-front framework. We'll kick things off with a political chessboard and the economic battleground. Then we'll jump to military posturing and that really deep clash over values. And then, at the end, we'll tackle the big one, the defining question of where all of this is actually going.
All right, first up, the political chessboard. Think of this as a massive global game of high-stakes diplomacy. You've got simmering territorial disputes and a worldwide race to win over allies and expand influence. It's where national pride and hard-nosed strategy are constantly bumping up against each other.
And when we talk about flashpoints, there is no bigger one, no doubt about it, than Taiwan. The disagreement here is just fundamental. The U.S., based on its own laws, sells defensive weapons to the island to try and deter an invasion. China, on the other hand, sees Taiwan as a breakaway province and views those arms sales as a direct attack on its sovereignty. This creates this constant, really dangerous feedback loop of action and reaction.
And look, this isn't just talk. This stuff is happening for real, out on the open water. In an incident in 2025, a Chinese ship actually rammed a Philippine vessel in the super-disputed South China Sea. Now, the key thing here is the American response. Washington came out and made it crystal clear that its mutual defense treaty with the Philippines would kick in a scenario just like that. That just shoots the stakes way, way up for any future run-ins.
So what you're seeing is this global scramble for friends, for allies. The U.S. is doubling down on security pacts like the Quad, that's with India, Australia, and Japan, and AUKUS, which is a huge tech-sharing deal to get Australia nuclear-powered subs. Meanwhile, China's playing a different game, using its huge economic muscle with things like the Belt and Road Initiative to make friends and lock in its own partnerships. It is a full-blown worldwide competition for influence.
Okay, let's pivot to front number 2, the economic battleground. On this front, the weapons are things like tariffs, export controls, and the race to control critical supply chains. This is where the competition really hits global markets and, yeah, our wallets. This little sequence from late 2025, it's the perfect example of this trade war dance they do. The U.S. slaps on some tariffs, and China immediately punches back by restricting key exports. Then, a big summit brings a temporary ceasefire. But you gotta look at the details. This is a timeout, not a peace treaty. Both sides are basically just holstering their economic weapons, keeping them ready for the next round.
You gotta understand, the tech war isn't just one fight. It's a whole series of skirmishes happening across these critical areas. When it comes to AI and semiconductors, the U.S. is desperately trying to block China's access to the most advanced tech, which would directly affect its military. And China, they're throwing billions at the problem, trying to become totally self-reliant. Then on the cybersecurity front, it's a war of words. The U.S. publicly calls out China for major hacks, and Beijing fires back with strong denials.
And this right here, this shows you the massive headache the U.S. is dealing with. On one hand, it wants to slow down China's military AI development. But on the other hand, its own huge tech companies rely heavily on the Chinese market. This back and forth over just a single advanced chip, the H200, it really shows you how tricky and how high stakes this whole economic balancing act has become. And in this whole economic fight, China has a major ace up its sleeve: rare earth minerals. By processing a whopping 70% of the world's supply, Beijing has some serious leverage. These things are in everything, from the phone in your pocket to the most advanced military gear, and that gives China a huge strategic card to play in any trade fight.
All right, time to shift gears. Front number 3, the military moves and posturing. This is where the hardware, the ships, the missiles, the nukes comes into play. And the tension here is centered squarely on the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, this is an absolute game changer. By 2025, China is expected to have around 600 nuclear warheads. I mean, the speed of this expansion is just stunning. This kind of breakneck modernization is totally changing the strategic balance of power, and you can bet it has Washington's and the entire world's undivided attention.
But hey, it's not just about counting weapons on a spreadsheet. It's about what happens when they get too close. When a government as careful as Japan's calls an incident dangerous, you know we are getting way too close to a major miscalculation. In this case, a Chinese jet painted a Japanese plane with its targeting radar. That's literally the last thing you do before you pull the trigger. It's an incredibly aggressive move that could lead to escalation in a split second. Then in late 2025, things got really tense. A record-breaking Chinese fleet of over 100 ships and aircraft suddenly popped up, surrounding Taiwan. This was so much more than a routine drill. It was a powerful, unmistakable message of intimidation, and it was aimed right at Taipei and the whole region.
So the big question is, what's the U.S. doing about all this? Well, it's responding with a pretty clear strategy of deterrence, one that's built on its alliances. That means more American military hardware in the region, better intel sharing with partners, and pushing forward with these advanced tech partnerships like the AUKUS subdeal. The goal here is really simple. Make any potential act of aggression just seem way too costly for anyone to even consider.
All right, on to our fourth front. And this one's different. It's ideological. This is a clash over deeply, fundamentally different values and systems of government. And it's focused on these really divisive issues like human rights, democracy, and international law. When it comes to the issue of Xinjiang, you're looking at two completely different realities. They're not even on the same planet. The U.S. has officially called China's treatment of the Uyghur people a genocide and has used powerful economic sanctions because of it. China fires back, calling this foreign interference in its internal business, arguing its policies are just necessary for fighting terrorism and keeping stability. On this, there is zero common ground.
And you see this same tit-for-tat pattern playing out over Hong Kong. After Beijing brought in its huge national security law, the U.S. hit back with targeted sanctions on key officials. And China? They immediately retaliated with their own countermeasures. It's a classic, textbook case of how this deep ideological clash just keeps feeding a dangerous cycle of escalation.
So one of the main tools the U.S. is using here is something called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Basically, it flips the script. It presumes that goods coming from that region are made with forced labor unless a company can prove they're not. And in 2025, this law got expanded to include big industrial materials, which shows you how this conflict over values is having a very real, very direct impact on global trade.
So that brings us to the big finale. After looking at the political, the economic, the military, and the values fronts, you have to step back and ask, what does all this add up to? And where in the world is this all going?
And this is maybe the most important thing to get. None of these fronts exist in a vacuum. They are all connected. A political spark over Taiwan can set off military tensions. A sanction over human rights leads to economic payback. A new tech breakthrough immediately becomes a military advantage. Think of them like interlocking gears in one giant, incredibly complex, and really volatile global machine.
And that all leads to the one question that really matters. Both the U.S. and China seem to be digging in for a long-term, maybe even generational rivalry. But at the same time, both sides publicly say they want to avoid a war. So, the great challenge of our time is figuring out how to manage this intense competition across all 5 of these fronts without it all spiraling into a global catastrophe. Is competition without catastrophe even possible? Finding the answer to that? Well, that's going to define the world for all of us.